Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. We'll just give it a couple of minutes, or just a little bit for people to join. I can see we have lots of people are kind of hopping in to join us now, which is lovely. I can see that there are people coming in from all over the world as well, which is obviously also something that we love to see. So wherever you are, good afternoon, good morning, good evening potentially, and thank you very much for joining myself and Mary Sako this afternoon to talk a little bit more about the diploma in global business at the SAI Business School. We have quite a lot to talk through, I hope, so I'll get started fairly quickly. Thank you to everybody who has submitted a question or anything kind of ahead of time. We've worked to get those into kind of into the conversation, but equally the Q&A function will be open for the duration of this afternoon's session. So please do pop any kind of questions that you have in there, and Mary and I will pick those up as we go through. I will move on then sort of pretty sharpish to welcoming Mary to the conversation, and just saying thank you very much for joining us. We have a little bit about Mary here. Mary is a professor of management studies at the SAI Business School, and has been the academic director for the diploma in global business actually since its launch all the way back in 2011. So she knows it pretty much inside out and back to front. As part of the work that she does both as the academic director, but also a member of teaching faculty on the programme, she's sort of really focused on the environment in which students are learning, and as I think sort of everybody is aware, for this year that has been a slightly atypical one, and sort of on really ensuring that students come out of that environment with the skills and the knowledge that they need to work and to focus on the challenges of working within a global business environment. So thank you very much for joining us, Mary. As I say, I'm just going to stop screen sharing at that point for the moment, so that we can get started with having a chat, which is what we're all here for. So as I started off with, you've been the academic director of the programme since its launch. And I just wondered if you would be happy to start off talking a little bit about what you sort of saw as the primary function of the programme as it launched, and who it was you were hoping to see joining the classroom in that first year.
Sure. Thank you, Kate, and welcome to everybody whom I can't see, which is not the usual situation. When I teach in a classroom, I can see every one of you, so it's a bit of a shame, but do actively participate, as in ask questions as I go along. If I'm going too fast or too slow, or things I missed out, just give me a shout in the chat function, and obviously best way to do that, and Kate will field the questions anyway. So this diploma in global business is something that I actually created, or had a hand in creating, co-creating, and that's quite an unusual situation, because typically we tend to fit into a program that's already there. So I kind of created it, as in I designed it from the beginning, and so everything that's right and wrong about it, both ways, it's all my responsibility. And with that preliminary comment, I think that the diploma really as its primary function was to provide with sort of global business executives, or people who aspire to become global business executives, some set of tools and frameworks and other knowledge base to be able to operate in a very effective way globally. And so effectiveness obviously depends on both the kind of logical power to be able to analyze and diagnose and use your expertise in one way, but in most cases, there are judgments which are involved, and then there are also challenges of implementation. And for these latter things, you really need not just the kind of, your brain power, but your emotional intelligence, or whatever you call it, the soft power to be able to sense and to make people do things that they don't necessarily want to do. And also, it's all about leadership, I think. So we cover quite a bit of that. And I hope that also the program is aimed to, provide a safe environment away from the pressure of day-to-day work, to be able to reflect a little bit and, to obviously be hungry and reach out for new knowledge base, but also a safe place where you can, contribute, but also listen to others, so that learning from each other in the classroom is really, really important as well. So we as instructors give you some, material, but obviously I would say over 50% of the learning takes place by listening to each other and actually interacting with each other as well. So again, it's really, really, strange that I can't see any of you, because, seeing and actually sensing, by your nonverbal facial expression, what you're thinking, what you might say, what you would have said, all that's actually in the classroom, and that's really, really important. In terms of the class composition and the type of people who are typically in the classroom, and I think some of you have asked these questions. One was about the industry composition, and what kind of job experiences and all that. And I would basically summarize by using one word: diversity. It really, really is diverse. And it's actually amazing that people like Kate and his predecessor reach out to a bunch of different organizations or individuals or companies, and then every year we end up with this, what I take for granted actually, although I'm sure a lot of hard work has gone into it, a very diverse set of people. Diversity first in terms of sectors. So of course, there is usually always every year, somebody from a bank or some kind of financial services. There's normally usually somebody from their kind of extractive industries like oil. And there's normally a large kind of, consumer-based products company and all that. But, necessarily there are people who might be in a kind of tech startup, or more sort of newer industries, which are in telecommunications or ICT, or even AI based tech based companies as well. So that's the diversity in terms of sectors. And in terms of geography, it really is amazing again that based in Oxford, I think it's really somewhat easier in some sense to attract people from different parts of the world anyway, not least because of London, and I guess the United Kingdom being, a country with both colonial and other links to the rest of the world. But we really do tend to have people from all the continents, and indeed, if you think about the British amongst the cohort, they're in a real minority. Normally, there's only like a handful of people who are from the United Kingdom, actually. So that's really enjoyable.
That's great, and that kind of certainly from my perspective, from recruiting, it's a really important part of the experience. I think not just from a faculty perspective, but from a participant perspective. To have all of those different sort of experiences and perspectives kind of joining together in the classroom over the course of the year.
Yeah, no, I think so too. Yeah, so we might say a bit more about this later, but to learn about global business, the easiest environment is to actually have people from different parts of the world to have a truly global conversation. Yeah. And sometimes it's really hard to do that if there is one dominant or majority nationality sitting in the classroom, but we tend not to have that. There are just so many different voices with so many different perspectives. So it is definitely a very complex conversation we'll have sometimes because of differences in cultural values or differences in their perspectives about their own governments as opposed to what the rest of the world think about their government and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, so but that's part of the learning.
Fantastic. Okay. So obviously the world, I suppose, both in general from a business perspective, has changed quite a lot in the last sort of 10, 11 years. Is that something that you've seen reflected in the programme? And is your experience of kind of directing it as both the founder and the designer and the a director, is that different sort of now to the way it was then?
Well, the experience of being the academic director of the program hasn't changed much until the lockdown, actually. So we'll talk about that later. Yeah. But the program, the content obviously has developed over the, so this year is the 11th cohort. So yeah, just over a decade. And I think that's partly, or actually it's primarily because the world has changed. And so once, when we're talking about global business, it's really about the business environment. And, when we started 10 years ago, 11 years ago, I think we were still at the tail end of what we might call the golden age of globalization, when people thought that, markets were opening up and the world was becoming flatter, to use the Freeman word. And so we've really shifted from that trajectory towards a golden age of globalization to, a slightly more bumpier road in terms of, where the markets are opening or closing. And people talk about deglobalization, but that D bit of it, the speed with which that's happening is uneven in different parts of the world as well.
Yes,
so
okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I think to summarize it very concisely, crossing borders, whether you're operating with goods and services or with movement of people, it just requires more careful thought, and so that is about related to more talks about things like trade barriers, tariffs, more state aid, just a whole bunch of industrial policy instruments that many different governments are using. And so that has impact on things like global supply chain, where in the golden age used to be the case that you located to get access to inputs, low-cost labor, low-cost resources, to now decisions that has to give a lot more regard to access to final markets. So that kind of shift from globalization to deglobalization also goes hand in hand with the role of government. So governments have become a lot more important, I think. And so it used to be the case that at least in a university environment, we educated business leaders in business schools and public servants in government policy.
Yes, okay.
Right? And that divide is actually blurring because, in my view, it's a lot more important for business leaders to interact with host governments and international organizations. And so it's that interaction and how you go about interacting. People talk about lobbying, but much beyond it, we talk in terms of corporate diplomacy, where I think businesses are charged to influence the policies and the regulation that governments are enforcing, and also creating as new rules on new issues like I don't know, cybersecurity, a lot of stuff around climate change, and so on and so forth. Yeah. So I would say that the program content has changed just to kind of keep up with the change in the world, and that's really summarized by talking in terms of bumpier world, less flat, and with that, the role of governments and the need for business leaders to understand how to influence, interact with governments.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose that, again, to go back to diversity, is quite a nice example of how, or the program is quite a nice sort of environment for those two sort of groups of people to come together and to have the opportunity to be in the same place and sort of learning at the same time, and learning from each other as well as from the faculty.
Sure. Yeah. So something that I omitted to say is that whilst the overwhelming majority of the class students are from the world of business, that there are every year a few from the other side, as it were. So some people who have worked for governments, their national governments in different departments, or from international organizations like the international financial institutions, and also we get a few from the third sector, like the charities and government organizations as well. Yeah, so having people who have worked in those different sectors, and they themselves may be actually thinking about a career transition to become a business leader, but actually for people who have never worked outside the world of business, it's good to have those people in the classroom too.
Yeah. No, fantastic. And so in terms of the sort of the function and the focus of the program, the content is obviously the the primary function, I suppose. But do you think there are any sort of particular strengths of the diploma sort of itself, either as from a structural perspective, from a content perspective, that that particularly sort of help you to address those issues and those challenges?
Yeah, so I think the strengths are both, well, there are three parts to it, actually, one of which we covered already, but one is content, the other one is pedagogy, I think, and the third is the student composition. So, obviously we talked about the diversity of the students in the classroom, and I think that's, just gives you a kind of a head start in terms of being able to have a, natural, truly global conversation. And so I think that's just something that, we come to take for granted, but I think that's not something that applies to many, programs elsewhere, which claim to be international, except that if you look at the student composition, then, like 70 or 80% of the students are from the country where the university is based, and an international component is the kind of 25, 30% max. Yeah. So that's not the case with us. We typically have, representation from like, 25 to 30 different countries, right? You probably have more accurate statistics. So that's really amazing. And that's not just talking about the developed world, the European and the United States, and a bit of Asia, but increasingly from different parts of the world, which are newer nations in Central Asia or Eastern Europe or, Africa, Southern Africa, as well as Northern Africa. So that's one. And the second strength that I want to talk a little bit about is pedagogy. And so, again, I said it's really strange that I can't see any of you because I'm not used to this, right? So, much of what we do in the classroom situation, although there are constraints, and I am so sorry that there's a phone that goes on. This is not good. Pedagogy, I think we do really want to think about, what specialists in education would call student-centered learning. But basically, from my perspective, I want the students to take a lead in the conversation with us as instructors and some business leaders as guest instructors, facilitating that conversation so that much of the learning takes place through a conversation, rather than, if you like, through just reading something or watching a video and then taking notes and absorbing that like paper, right? So much of it, I mean, we'll obviously ask you to do readings and, watching videos and things like that before you come to the classroom. But once you do come to the classroom and during that intense week when you're in Oxford, much of it during class, during lunch, during dinner and outside is about interaction. And that conversation that mediates the learning experience. And why that is really important is because I think you have a particular perspective or particular viewpoint that you might get out of a particular piece of reading, but you'll be surprised how many different perspectives there are from reading the same thing. And putting yourself in the shoes of other people or other protagonists or whatever is actually easier said than done, unless you converse and actually encounter that particular perspective from a real person, right? So that's really the resolution of having an interaction that is really, really quite intense, but also makes you think about your own perspective, and then maybe get you to think about it in a different way as well. So that's the pedagogy part of it. And so as a result, we've had a series of changes in the cohorts around guest speakers and and instructors who are able to do that. And content, I think, very briefly would be about the kind of, I guess, the current nature of some of the contents, and we might talk a bit more about that later. But we do make things relevant to the current business issues, the kind of issues that businesses are facing, and those are not just about kind of business focused decisions around, whether or not to outsource or insource, or, whether or not to locate in different parts of the world, but also global issues like sustainability, human rights, where businesses are increasingly being expected to play some kind of role, right? So some of you might have heard of the United Nations guidelines on business and human rights. Human rights observation used to be the matter for countries. They sign up to Human Rights Convention, and businesses basically just needed to let the governments police violations of human rights. But with that United Nations guidelines, businesses are now held responsible and have some responsibility for remedies and human rights violation as well. So, if you look at newspapers, Financial Times, The Economist, and other things that you read, and a lot of the headline news, you may think of as nothing to do with me as a business leader. But if you, really think, again, many of these issues have something to do with some things that you're doing as a business leader as well. And so that particular aspect has become quite strong. I think that it's that's something that we started doing before, in the program 10, 11 years ago. But I think the ways in which those issues have risen in prominence and pertinence for businesses is something that we want to carry on, emphasizing as a strength in the program.
Fantastic. No, that's great. And obviously a strength that I don't think we need to state explicitly sort of is from a faculty perspective, the colleagues that you work with and have kind of sort of always worked with on the programme. And I just wondered sort of what has been, or what kind of was and what has been your experience of working with faculty colleagues across the business school and really sort of pulling together their different expertise across the 4 modules of the diploma programme.
Sure. So when I started this diploma, my side-based faculty was actually smaller. So out of necessity, I had to go out and spot experts in different parts. And actually that led to great interaction with different departments within the university. And I think that's also a strength too. So it's been enjoyable to kind of design and put together what's possible. So for example, in module 1, we talk about leading across different national cultures. And I don't do it anymore actually, but I did reach out to an anthropologist who could come and talk to us about an anthropological perspective on culture. In module 2 on risk and reputation, we have a leadership coach who doubled up as a political theorist, and he was a colleague who still is teaching on the program, who had been at the Department of Politics. And so he's moved now to Australia, but he still comes to teach about that. And in module 3, we have that's on corporate diplomacy, and we have a trade economist who used to be in the economics department. We also have a lawyer on human rights and also on the investors state dispute resolution. So legal skills I think are quite important, and at least even if you're not a lawyer, you need to know the basics of what the law says and how to react to that. So that's another expertise. And Oxford's also full of area studies experts. These are social scientists, economists, and sociologists and anthropologists who know deeply about a particular country or particular region. And so we're going to reach out to people who know a lot about particular countries in Africa, for example, and so that's the kind of thing that we can do, because we're part of, it's a business school that is part of the university, and so it's been great to assemble those expertise.
Assemble your Avengers.
And
then sort of outside of the university as well, you've just touched on this briefly, but obviously there are kind of industry guests and speakers that you welcome across the programme as well. And that's is that an element that you think is an important one to have those voices in the classroom as well?
Sure. Yeah. So that was from the beginning part of the design principle to have, instructors like myself, who's an academic, who does research, but, basically have never practiced business on the one hand, and on the other, the industry guests who are basically, currently working in some capacity. And the two are really, really important because there are limits to what you can do in the classroom situation. And we can convey systematic thinking but really getting a feel for the implementation challenges is another. And so in a classroom, if you like, academics simplify and industry guests tell you how complicated things are. And I think you need to hear both, right? Because that's how you can really become more effective through learning. And so, just to give an example of guests, one guest speaker who's been around since the beginning is a protagonist in a case that we will discuss on a large fast-moving consumer products company. And he'll tell you, what it's like to be in the heat of the moment making decisions, which are part of the case discussion after the case discussion ends. And so that's great. There's another guest who is a lawyer turned entrepreneur in a diamond business. And, he'll tell us about corporate diplomacy in action. This is negotiation and a lot of it closed doored, and therefore you don't really actually observe it, but he'll at least, give you an inkling of what it must be like to negotiate with host governments of countries where his mines are located. So these are just kind of a couple of examples where real voices are really, really important.
Yeah, fantastic. And a couple of things we've sort of already touched on as we've gone on, but obviously with respect to kind of the international and the global situation at the moment, is there anything for 2022 that you think will be a particularly pertinent sort of issue for the programme that maybe hasn't existed as much in the past? COVID-19 is the obvious one, but anything that you think will kind of engender a change or a shift from this point on?
So yeah, up till now, and really until last year, obviously COVID-19 wasn't there at all, and obviously last year and this year we've basically COVID was everywhere in the curriculum in one sense, because you cannot stop talking about it. Before that, Brexit was everywhere and we couldn't stop talking about it. So but with COVID-19, I think, interesting enough, we have in Module 2 a workshop on scenarios and scenario planning. And pre-COVID, about 4 years ago, there was one student group that was building scenarios, and that was about a pandemic.
Really?
Yeah. So
how prescient.
That student group wrote to me saying how proud they were that they actually foresaw this, or at least was better prepared. I think is the way to talk about this, not prediction and foreseeing.
Okay.
But so but also, sort of from last year, we discussed the impact of COVID on, global value chain, global supply chain, and also on cultural differences by governments in dealing with a lockdown, and the business role in the supply chain for, and also the R&D for the vaccine and all that as well. So that is there. I think that issues on climate change and sustainability. One of my immediate colleagues is an expert on sustainability. So we do, and in fact, one of the questions submitted before this session was about, would you incorporate the topic of sustainability development model? So it's not necessarily about development model for economic development, but at least we talk about sustainability, and we deal with a kind of session around really kind of understanding what lies at the heart of what Elinor Ostrom called the tragedy of the commons, kind of overuse of public resources, and then consider alternative mechanisms for avoiding that tragedy. So that it will continue to be part of the curriculum. And then I guess that kind of, globalization, deglobalization balance, we are going to be in the world, continue to be in the world where, world powers are going to be multipolar. So there's the rise of China up against the United States. And I think that's a dynamic that's going to continue. And my worldview also includes continued importance of governments. So, governments are there not just to deal with the pandemic. I think even if the pandemic is actually under control, governments will play a bigger role in controlling within their territory movements of goods and services and people. So we'll continue to teach about international trade regimes and how businesses can make use of that in module 3 in particular. But I think governments are going to continue to be important in democracies and non-democracies. And at the same time, though, the challenge is that you need greater intergovernmental coordination to deal with global issues like climate change, like response to the pandemic, like dealing with refugee and asylum seekers. So that's basically autonomous governments which are inward-looking on the one hand, and also the need for them to become a lot more outward-looking, coordinating among them, so that we can actually solve these global issues that only collaboration among governments and businesses actually can bring about.
Yes, yeah, you start to see the sort of the intertwining and the intermingling quite quickly, don't you, when you start to talk about it, which is nice. Not to stick with the pandemic, because as you've said, it's everywhere. But as we touched on kind of briefly at the beginning, it has resulted obviously in a difference to the way the programme has been delivered kind of over the last 12 to 18 months. And so I was just sort of hoping to hear a little bit about your experience of how that has been working with the online and the hybrid delivery that we have at the moment.
Yeah, so I'm sure a lot of the attendants of this webinar are very interested in, what would the experience be like if you arrive and next year. I think what's been the most difficult to deal with was the uncertainty more than anything else. With that, I should say that the experiences of the cohort last year is very different from this year. In 2020, we had a physical first module in Oxford in January 2020. And then we went virtual in module 2 onwards.
Yeah.
So they had this wonderful Oxford experience, and then that was taken away from them. And that made it really, really hard for them to kind of, in a way recuperate. But this year, we started in January 2021 from the beginning virtually. And we can only get better. It could be that we go to hybrid in the next module and all that. So I think how you start and what you move on to is important. But I would say 2 or 3 considerations here. There was a choice, I think, when we went virtual to move a lot more material to what we call asynchronous as opposed to synchronous delivery. So asynchronous is basically giving you some video clips to watch outside the classroom, and then for you to basically look at it and study on your own. And that's basically what a lot of the online program is about, right? Even created. And synchronous is when you actually have an interaction with an instructor and your fellow students. So whilst we were given that choice, we did not actually increase any kind of asynchronous material, excepting for a very small proportion. So I would say that 90%, 95% of the content is delivered synchronously during the week when the program is taking place. And I think that's really important for a reason that I mentioned earlier about pedagogy, that it's very much about learning from each other as much as from the instructor. And you can do that only if everything is synchronous and you're actually put on the spot to think hard about what your own views are in relation to other people's views as well. Okay, so that's one thing, one consideration. I don't think we're going to change that. So this is not an online program where you study on your own by watching a video to which you cannot kind of argue against or can interact with. It's an online program with a lot of synchronous interaction that goes on. And I think the modification of the virtual or hybrid delivery had to take us place, of course, but those are at the margin. So we're talking in terms of things like, more frequent breaks, because it's really, really hard on your eyes. We're talking about perhaps a little bit more frequent, small group discussion, where the groups are smaller, again, to make it possible to manage that. So we're talking about modifications of that level in terms of the delivery, but in terms of the overall structure, overall pedagogical principles, we have not changed at all. Mm.
No, that's fantastic. And we've just had a question submitted, which sort of fits into just a little bit, just in terms of kind of getting your perspective on how students kind of have and do interact with each other outside of the classroom. So between the classes, between the modules, and sort of how that pans out across the whole of the year that they're enrolled.
Yeah, sure. So it's like actually, I've observed it 11 times now. So a bunch of grown-up, people arrive in Oxford like school children. Firstly, I shouldn't say this, but they look a little bit nervous because they're on their own. They don't know each other at all. But after about half a day, even, or the whole day, they begin to actually have the basis for, really strong friendship. At least, if not other kinds of intellectual and business type links. And so with that, by the end of the first module, they are setting up WhatsApp group. They are setting up all kinds of, study groups, which are geographically based. For example, there's one in London, there's one in Dubai or whatever. And then they basically review the material and revise for the exams and, things like that together. So interaction is quite intense. And that kind of intensity of interaction, in my view, is an asset that you carry through the program, but also afterwards as well. Mm-hmm. And that's also quite interesting to see how they continue to just, Oxford Link is one thing, but away from Oxford, the students themselves are self-organized in such a way that they're really making use of that network of people that they got to know. Some of it could be more like a senior-junior mentoring relationship. In other cases, it could be a business partnership so that they get into creating a new business together. So there are other examples, but there's that kind of real, truly long-lasting, both friendship and kind of alumni network that I think is the nature of things. So so I think it just, I'm not part of that, but it looks really fun and it looks really valuable. Yeah.
Great. No, that's lovely. So just a couple more things to talk about before I go on to just talk a little bit about the application process and etc. for the diploma as well. But if you had to think about sort of, and again in your experience of the people that you've seen on the program and maybe what they're doing and what they go on to do, what is there anything that you would pick out as a particular advantage of having studied sort of this particular program?
Yeah, I think so. Short term and long term. I think in the short term, even during the program, I kind of encourage individuals to keep a kind of a record and a notebook, and basically kind of review the tools and frameworks that we offer during the classroom, and how some, not every single one of them, but some of them have made you think differently about the issues that they're facing at work. It could be differently, or it could be actually more about making explicit what you already know implicitly. Yeah. So sometimes it's like that. Yeah. So being able to articulate how you would solve the problem and why, because a lot of clever people, business leaders included, can do it intuitively, but you cannot explain why.
Yes. Okay.
And that explanation is quite important, because that's the basis for also mentoring and encouraging your subordinates and juniors to be able to do the same as well. Mm-hmm. So we're imparting something that I think is valuable to that. And the greatest thing about teaching is that some students come back and say, wow, I just used one of the frameworks to make a presentation to the board and it actually worked, as in they convinced the board to take up the idea, whatever that is. So that kind of short-term, very concrete advantages, I think. But the long-term one is the the network that I've just talked about. Yeah, so just come to be part of a network of people who you studied together, and not just the instructors, but the students, the fellow students. And that, I think, is a big advantage and big asset that you'll take away, in my view. And it could be inter-cohort, so we'll kind of have an opportunity to be able to interact with students who have already graduated, as well as, within your cohort, there's also during the same period, other diplomas which are running. So diploma in global business, but also 3 or 4 now, actually, other diplomas. So if you want to reach out to them, you can also network as well. And that actually creates also very strong bonds over time as well.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. And I have this down as a bonus question, but we have time, so I will move on to it. If you had to choose a favorite part of the program, and as the designer, you might have one, what would that be? And why do you think that is?
Yeah, that's a difficult one. I think for a combination of reasons, I think it's module 3 on corporate diplomacy. So corporate diplomacy kind of sounds intriguing, and I guess I labeled it. So I am kind of proud of, articulating something that isn't really articulated very well. And so again, this is like, people who used to be ex-diplomats or ex-military or ex-journalists who have connections, and they do, stuff that nobody else can on behalf of corporations. And we had an unfortunate ExxonMobil coverage the other day as well. But that kind of stuff is really, either an activist really sort of trying to debase the whole activity, and therefore is all kind of seen to be full of corruption, or full of something that's a little bit illegitimate, to really understanding what is really going on. So I think I had spent enough time talking to people who are in that particular industry to understand what this is about. And I think because interfacing with governments is important and continue to be important, I like the content. I also, at this stage, module 3 is, from day 1 when nobody knew each other to, sort of module 2 and 3, at the point when I think most students are getting really into the content. They're getting their teeth into it, and they're really thinking hard, but also disagreeing with each other a lot. And that's really good to see. And then last and not least, of course, normally it's in June and British weather not being very predictable, but in most cases, it's actually very nice and benign and sunny, and you can do outdoor activities like punting and having a glass of something in an Oxford College lawn. All that image, I think the combination, I think, is quite nice.
Okay, that's great. It sounds idyllic. It is. Thank you so much, Mary. We don't have any other questions submitted at the moment, so I will move on just to talk briefly for everybody a little bit about the application process for the diploma and the next steps if anybody is interested in making an application. So I will just reshare my screen, which will pop up here. Hello to Mary again. So the diploma program, just for anybody who has joined and would just like them to review any of the key facts, is a 1-year part-time master's level qualification. It's delivered in 4 taught modules over 12 months, and the next program that we're recruiting for will start in January of 2022. If you are keen to make an application, I will just skip on to this slide very quickly in terms of what you need to be thinking about. We have an online application a sort of system in which you would be looking to set up an account and to work through the online application form. We sort of have general admissions requirements that include a good first degree and a minimum of 5 years relevant professional experience. You don't need to take a GMAT or a GRE, which I think is which I hope is a positive thing, but you will need to put together kind of a variety of documentation, etc., for us to take a look at as part of your application. So we always need to see a copy of an up-to-date CV. We need to see copies of your academic transcripts. There are also two essay questions, and we also ask you to provide two either professional or academic references. So an application consists essentially of those elements pulled together, and on that sort of a decision is made kind of whether or not to offer a place on the programme. If we just jump back to the slide that I skipped through before, I just wanted, and Mary has spoken about this sort of very nicely already, but just I wanted to talk a little bit about the potential for hybrid delivery and things like that in 2022. So here you can sort of see the general and sort of typical structure for a diploma programme, the 4 modules that will take place across the year. As Mary kind of has touched on, sort of for 2020 and for 2021, and delivery has obviously been sort of a little bit kind of atypical. And for 2021 programmes, certainly we launched online and kind of are now moving back into a sort of a hybrid delivery model as far as we can. It's possible that will continue into 2022. That's really reflective of our aim to be able to offer diploma programmes to as many people as we can, and to do that as safely as possible, but also still kind of really maintaining the diverse global intake, and sort of again, as Mary has talked through, the hybrid delivery is a really coordinated and kind of interactive learning experience, whereby we might see participants joining both in person in Oxford and kind of online from around the world. So if anybody is sort of keen to proceed or to consider an application, but has kind of any more detailed questions about how the hybrid delivery would look, and sort of how it might pan out for you wherever in the world you are, please don't hesitate to get in touch, and I will obviously be more than happy to talk things through in a little bit more detail. To just go back very quickly to the applications, we do run application deadlines across the year. It's kind of a rolling process, so you're free to submit an application at any time. If you're interested in submitting for a scholarship, and there are specific associated deadlines, and so it's worth having a look at those. But we will accept applications up until the end of this year, and because it's a rolling process, kind of once you have submitted your application, we aim to get back to you within 4 weeks, so you're not then kind of waiting until at the end of the process. Let's have a look, and sort of, as I say, if anybody is interested in receiving any further information, if you would like to download a brochure and to submit your CV for review, or to set up a call, my contact details are just there. I look a little bit different to the picture there at the moment, but it's the same person, and I will be I'm very happy to hear from anybody who is interested in joining us either in 2022 or into the future. Mary, do you sort of, again, as we don't have any questions coming through, is there any?
We do have a few in the Q&A, actually.
Oh,
Okay.
do we? Okay, let's have a look.
We
Yes, okay,
before.
sorry, here we go. So we have a couple of questions about external scholarships to the business school, and the answer in terms of whether the diploma programmes are compatible for external scholarships is unfortunately largely not. The financial assistance that exists for the diploma programmes is the scholarships that are available through the school. If you are looking at an external a scholarship, and you're wondering if it would be possible for you to apply that funding to the diploma programme, you would need to have a conversation with that and that independent or that individual body, and they'll be able to let you know if the funding can be placed against the diploma programme. Well, as we come to the close, then I suppose I've already spent my bonus question, but I thought of another one. So from your perspective, Mary, is there anything that you would I don't know, is there anything that you, is there any advice that you would have for for budding applicants? Anything that that you think it's important to have to considered or to have thought about in the context of the programme?
It's difficult to focus on just a single message, I think. But once you decide to apply and you decide to come, I think that's a major decision in your life, and I think you would have made the right decision for yourself. And that post that the main thing for most people that would make it really a valuable experience is really brilliant time management. Because most people have day-to-day pressures, and I think it's really a good thing to be able to put aside time to really do the course material preparation, but also to be able to spend undistracted time without having to make phone calls during break and things like that. It's not always in your control, particularly if you work for an organization that is fairly large. But that's one thing I would say. But prior to deciding on whether or not to apply, I think the main decisions and reasons why are so different from individual to individual that I guess clarity around why you're doing it is a good conversation to be had, maybe with yourself, but maybe with other people, your family. You do need their support, I would say, and also your colleagues as well. But some people come onto the program with a very clear idea about career transition, for example. Other people have just a very broad set of mind-broadening ambition and a hunger to learn something new, and both are equally valid. So I think as long as you're clear about the intention and why you're applying, I think that's all that I would advise to clarify. Yeah.
Okay. And we have actually had an on-topic a question come through here as well, which is I can assure you for you and not to me, and that's just wondering if you think that the deglobalization phase is something that will continue, and if it does, whether you see that as a sort of a challenge in particular for the programme to address.
Yeah, so that's a question from Jocelyn. Yeah, thanks for these great questions. I think that globalization and deglobalization is like a scale. So where you sit, on the scale, will shift over time, I'm sure. But I think it's about the unevenness rather than a kind of singular direction that we're all traveling towards, one direction towards greater globalization as a global market. I think that's over. It had been over for some time, I think. Once we kind of paid more attention to the so-called emerging markets, maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, I think that multipolarity in the world and where the engines of economic growth, but also political power would come, it's a multipolar world. And that's I think, if you mean by deglobalization, it's a multipolar world, then I think I would say it will continue. So that makes it actually a challenge, but also that really is the essence of the program, as you say. So, because it's called global business, it's not about businesses operating in a flat world and that's it. It's actually more important in an non-flat world. And so I'm pleased that the kind of issues that we are, grappling with and had done, since 10 years ago have become even more important today. And that's basically primarily about businesses influencing, but also collaborating with governments and other stakeholders to, in the end, solve the world's really complex problems. We talked about climate change, we talked about human rights, we talked about the pandemic. Those are just some of the issues, right, that businesses on their own cannot solve. And you can't leave it to other actors to solve either. And I truly believe that businesses, have a role to play, but the society at large also look to businesses to take a part as well. So that's the kind of narrative that will go over in different guises, in different contexts, in different sectors, in different parts of the world, so that you'll be more effective, hopefully, in leading an organization in this, what in effect is a very kind of uneven, uncertain, and a bumpy ride.
Yeah, cool. All right. Well, I think that's all of the questions that we have, which is lovely. I'm really pleased that so many of you were able to join us this afternoon, and I hope that you've enjoyed the session. I'd like to extend a final, very sincere thanks to Mary for joining us, and for sharing her experiences of working on the diploma programme over the last sort of decade, as she says. And from my perspective, if anybody is sort of interested to learn any more and would like to have a further conversation, please don't hesitate to get in touch. Thanks very much.
Great, thank you. Hope to see some of you at least next year.
Yes. Thanks very much, everyone.
Okay. Bye.